I'm Ben Wiedemann in Rome, and this is CNN.
It's Friday, October the 18th. I'm Anisha Tank in London.
And I'm Pauline Chu in Hong Kong. Welcome to World Business Today. Here are the top stories that we're following. China reports its fastest growth all year, but challenges still remain for the world's second biggest economy.
The shutdown may be over in Washington, but for a group of U.S. lawmakers, their work is just getting started.
We now know who bought this famous submarine car at auction, and he's got plans to bring it to life.
All of that coming right up, but first, these are the top news stories we're following here at CNN right now. Australian authorities say at least one person has been killed as bushfires rage in the state of New South Wales. About 100 fires are burning, 30 of them are uncontained. The state premier said it would take several days to get on top of all the fires. Iraqi police say at least 34 people were killed in a series of car bombings and roadside explosions throughout Baghdad. At least 10 car bombs exploded. Police say many of them were set off at parks used by families celebrating the Muslim holiday of Eid. There could be more protests in France today against the deportation of immigrant families. Thousands of people demonstrated in Paris and other French cities on Thursday. It follows the expulsion of a 15-year-old Roma girl and her family to Kosovo earlier this month.
Our top business story today, the world's second largest economy is growing faster again after coming out of a slowdown. China says output in the third quarter was up 7.8% from a year earlier. It is the best quarterly growth rate this year, matching market expectations. Now the government says it should hit its target of 7.5% of growth for this entire year, but questions remain about whether it can sustain this. Some analysts say a growing debt bubble threatens to drag the economy off course. Well, to help us break down this data, CNN Emerging Markets editor John Defterius joins us right here in the studio. So, John, what do you make of this higher number?
Well, it's very interesting. If you look at it from a distance, it doesn't look like the staircase going lower was a big concern, but 7.9, 7.7, 7.5%. It was a very good signal we could get to 7.8%. It wasn't by accident. Premier Lee loosened up some funding to put it into the transportation sector and then also cut taxes at the same time. And voila, you get 7.8%. Now, the concern is China itself has a target of 7.5% for 2013, but they lowered the bar for 2014 to 7%. As you know, the Chinese like to overshoot the targets and deliver above what they suggested there at the bottom at 7%. CNN Money did a survey, and they're suggesting 7.25% for 2014. Can they engineer the soft landing is the real question while trying to deflate the housing bubble? We still see credit rising there. And this is the big challenge for 2014. Try to slow things down a little bit, but to sustain that growth at 7% is the big concern for next year.
Yeah, the credit issue, the housing issue, we still see house prices rising. So it really is a tough uphill battle in terms of trying to find that right balance. And in November, we have the Communist Party meeting. Economic reforms will surely be at the top of their agenda. But what do you expect to be the goals for this meeting?
Well, it's interesting. We put up kind of the four key pillars of what's going to be driving the future here in China. This is a shot from the Communist Party meeting last year. It was really engineered in transition from President Xi and Premier Lee. The year of transition after 10 years of the party focused on dealing with corruption, focused on sustaining growth. I think in 2013 Communist Party meeting, it's going to be bringing in that credit, loose credit right now, and trying to manage the transition to the major cities, deal with unemployment while trying to sustain growth of 7 to 7.5%. So the focus is on the economy. The transition went very well. Where do they go from here? Industrial production. Will it stay at 10%? Retail sales, the envy of the world, 13.3%. But can they sustain that going forward is a huge question.
Let's talk about China with the big story this week, which was the U.S. debt ceiling debate. And China was very vocal about it leading up to the resolution, the temporary resolution. And they were also very vocal afterwards. But what choice does China really have? Because they are the biggest foreign bond holders of U.S. debt. Their foreign exchange reserves are $3.3 trillion. The U.S. part is about a third of that. It's not like they can just dump U.S. bonds and buy something else. What exactly are their choices?
Well, in fact, there's a lot of things at play here, but having $3.3 trillion makes it difficult. Where do you park that money? So your point is well taken. They have about a third of that into the United States, and I thought the comment was a very strong one. We have a picture here of the Federal Reserve Board. There's been some criticism beyond the debt ceiling of what China has suggested about the Federal Reserve. They put out a signal the third week of May that they're going to pull back the quantitative easing. That was Ben Bernanke. They went a full 3.5 months before they said perhaps it's not a very good idea right now. So very mixed signals. But in that period between May and September, China and the other emerging markets saw a lot of capital come out of their equity markets and the bond markets, and it was a shock. And now that we see the debt problem out of the way, the day after, the official newspaper, Xinhua news agency, put out a fairly strong comment. Let's take a look at what it suggested. They even had the description, Pauline, of a fuse that's burning right now, and they just extended the fuse, that they didn't really solve the problem. But let's take a look at the quote of what Xinhua had to say. Politicians in Washington have done nothing substantial but postponing once again the final bankruptcy of global confidence in the U.S. financial system. Isn't that interesting? Because before the G20 meeting, they had the vice minister, Mr. Lee, come out with very tough language about the Federal Reserve Board's policy, not liking the fact that they decided to pull back on the tapering and not giving clear signals. We had the red line on Syria, which was not followed. President Obama's red line on debt, which in fact they had to back off again. 2 APEC summits that the president couldn't attend right now. And then mixed signals about whether they're going to really manage the U.S. economy, the debt ceiling. And China says, look, we have $1.3 trillion at stake here. Can you manage this and give us a long-term horizon? Much easier when you're a communist party, of course, a single-party system, not the democracy. Right. But the fact is right now the U.S. has not been sending clear signals.
Yeah, and democracy may be great, but it can be messy, yes, as we've seen in the U.S. Now, you did mention the Federal Reserve and how they telegraphed that they were going to taper, and then they didn't. Well, they have their next meeting at the end of October. Most people believe that they probably won't taper. What do you think will happen if they, in fact, do, say, next year? I mean, what is it going to do to emerging markets? Because as we've seen, they have been hammered so much since May and June when Ben Bernanke had indicated that they might taper.
Well, in fact, if there's a silver lining out of this debt crisis, and as the Chinese have described, just extended the fuse to January, February, one thing they have extended along the way is quantitative easing. It'd be very difficult for the Federal Reserve to say to those partners within the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, not only do we have chaos in our backyard when it comes to the debt ceiling, we're going to wreak havoc still in the emerging markets and the developed world by pulling back that support. So what I think Janet Yellen, the new chairwoman of the Federal Reserve, is going to do is suggest, let's just keep a steady hand on the tiller right now, let this go through 2014, but the message to emerging markets, get much better at stimulating domestic growth. That applies to China and the others right now. India, Brazil, Russia, substantial write-downs in terms of their forecast for 2014. China coming in between 7.5% for 2014. But this is a good time for these economies to get their house in order as well.
Yeah, because they've really been laid naked with their current account deficits because of what's happened or what hasn't happened since May. John, always great to see you. Thank you so much, John Defterios, our emerging markets editor. Now, we will take a look at Asian markets in just a moment. But first, let's see how European markets are doing since they are about an hour into trading right now. Manisha.
Yeah, they certainly are, Pauline. And, you know, this time yesterday, we were looking at these markets and we had a very muted reaction to that deal on Capitol Hill. Things looking very different this morning. And now that we're looking at the growth data coming out of China, people getting somewhat excited about it. But still, we're only up a fraction if you look at the Xetra DAX. And there in Germany, you have a lot of the big engineering companies that have a huge amount to benefit from any expansion in China. We've seen that as a real tail over the last 10 to 15 years. But otherwise, the other major European markets moving to the upside. What's interesting about this is we're seeing on some of the Europe-wide indexes the 7th straight session of gains, and that's the first time that's happened in a long time. So that's a real gauge of consumer sentiment right now. People also keeping their eye on what's been happening in the US and the fact that you had the S&P again at this all-time high. So very much keeping their eye as they trade here in Europe on things happening around the world. And today, certainly the focus is those growth numbers out of China, Pauline.
Yeah, and Asian shares here, Manisha, ended the week mostly in the green. This follows relief over the debt deal in Washington, as well as the China GDP numbers. And investors welcomed those figures out of China. Beijing also released data on retail sales and factory output. Both were up strongly, but retail sales were a little short of analysts' expectations. And another caveat, when you peel back the layers, industrial output showed a slight drop from August, even though it was up from a year ago. Now, the main Aussie benchmark was up by about 0.75% today, closing at a 5-year high, thanks to those GDP numbers out of China, which is their main trading partner. Tokyo was the only market in the red today as we saw the yen strengthen. Manisha.
Yeah, I mentioned just a moment ago, Pauline, that S&P record closing high. We can look at the numbers now. You can see the S&P there up almost, 0.02%. We've got the NASDAQ rising as well in the session. All of this in the wake of Congress sealing that 11th hour deal to avoid the debt crisis, whatever your opinion might be. Many saying we didn't need to spend those 2 weeks deliberating. It should have been done differently, but it was done the way it was done. And we did have that resolution yesterday. The Dow, though, ended the day flat. And now that was weighed down after shares of IBM fell more than 6%. And that was on weak third quarter earnings.
IBM was the drag. You take out IBM, the market would have been up about 70 points. IBM was 74 points of the weighted average, dragging it down. But it's those earnings. You know, they're not making any money at the end of the day. The revenue, very weak. We've seen that now. I think 61 companies have reported, and about I think it was 52% had weak revenues. The bottom line is even weaker, but it's still growing at a 1.4% right now. So overall, this is not going to be a bang-up earnings season, especially for the financials. But I think, we'll just irk out a little growth, which is better than no growth.
So let's check out some of those other stock-specific hotspots. Goldman Sachs is one of them, and it's one of the companies that reported weak revenue in the third quarter. It was down 22%. From the previous quarter. It was down 20% from a year earlier. The bank did, however, post a better-than-expected profit. It isn't all gloomy. Stronger earnings did send Google stock well above its all-time highs in after-hours trading. Profit jumped 36% to nearly $3 billion, but its Motorola unit continued to be a bit of a drag on the results. In the aviation sector, American Airlines parent company AMR posted its most profitable quarter ever. American earned $530 million. It's pretty good for an airline which filed for bankruptcy in 2011. However, the financial turnaround may actually weigh on the airline's planned merger with U.S. Airways. The U.S. Justice Department has argued that AMR's numbers show that American can survive on its own, and a merger would just reduce competition. If it does come off, though, it would produce the world's largest airline. Pauline.
Well, the U.S. Department of Labor says it plans to release its September jobs report on Tuesday. Remember, we were supposed to get it a while ago. It's more than 2 weeks late, delayed by the government shutdown. This monthly report is, of course, a key indicator of the U.S. economy. September's numbers are especially important as the Federal Reserve debates whether or not to slow down its bond buying program, and it has 2 more meetings, one at the end of this month and another one in December. Now, the Department of Labor says that in August, more than 169,000 jobs were created, with unemployment at 7.3%.
A reminder that you're watching World Business Today. There's still lots to come on this show. U.S. lawmakers have put an end to the shutdown, as you've been hearing, but there's a lot of work ahead. So we'll tell you why these people are so crucial to avoiding more debt drama in the future. Stay with us.
perspectives, new ideas, new voices. QF Radio. Find your frequency.
This week on Inside Africa.
Do you ever consider when you're on the road that the tires on which you're riding could have originated right here in Africa? I'm Errol Barnett, Inside Africa, and this week's show is all about rubber and the process of transformation, taking it from a seed in the ground to a wheel on the road.
Inside Africa, Saturday only on CNN. In association with Zenith Bank.
So the US government is very much up and running again, and who is there to welcome federal employees back to work but the Vice President himself? Joe Biden greeted them all with a handshake and a smile and apologized for the government shutdown. If only that would work with investors as well. Well, it may be over, but the real work is just beginning for this group of people, the Budget Conference Committee. It's due to meet in just over a week, but these four budget leaders got talks started early on Thursday. If this bipartisan group can reach an agreement on tax provisions and the spending level, then there is less of a chance of another government shutdown in January.
We're just starting our discussions, but let's understand what we're doing here. We're going back to regular order. This is the budget process. The House passes a budget, the Senate passes a budget, you come together to try and reconcile the differences. That's the way we're supposed to do things.
Chairman Ryan knows I'm not going to vote for his budget. I know that he's not going to vote for mine. We're going to find the common ground between our two budgets that we both can vote on, and that's our goal.
This is a bipartisan committee, so let's see if they can do it, and they've got their work cut out for them. Washington has developed a habit of postponing big decisions rather than resolving them right away. Richard Quest explains.
This latest series of can kicking began in the summer of 2011. When Congress raised the debt ceiling, the US lost its AAA, and a super committee was formed to sort out the budget problems. The can was kicked. In November of that year, the super committee failed to reach an agreement. Threw the decision back to Congress, who, not surprisingly, kicked the can. Fast forward, and the fiscal cliff crisis is upon us. Congress still couldn't agree. Sequestration came in, and as for the deficit and debt ceiling, down the road. And so we come to the budget crisis of the past few days, where the US came as close to default as it ever wants to. The debt ceiling was finally raised. The US government was reopened, but of course it was only done by kicking the can into next year. So now there's another 4 months to try and reach a long-lasting budget agreement. All involved would do well to remember an important economic fact. There comes a time when there's no longer any road to kick the can down. Richard Quest, CNN, New York.
That can is getting quite a beating these days. Well, another analogy I like to use, Manisha, is it's like Congress and the White House are in a car and they have almost no gas left. And instead of just filling up the tank and going the whole distance, they're just going a little bit, a few feet, a few meters, and adding a few drops of gas or petrol, and then just they sort of sputter along. It's all quite frustrating to watch, isn't it?
It is, it is. I have a metaphor for you as well. Yesterday, we were out on the South Bank in London. We were broadcasting from there, and the weather was glorious. But the day before, the weather had not been so glorious. The analogy being that, of course, the day before was the day that they were all still bickering about this, and it was passed from the Senate to the House, and from the House back to the Senate. And then when the weather cleared up, what I'm worried about is it's a bit like British weather. It's very changeable in terms of the political mood. And for me, the politics is key. I'm very hopeful, though, about these long-term talks. I know they keep kicking the can, but at the end of the day, to get long-term solutions, you need concentrated, consistent effort And I hope that's what we're going to see on the political side this time. So, you know, of course, we'll keep on top of it, won't we, Pauline, and track these developments as they come. Still ahead on this show, a thriving fishing village in India is working to pick up the pieces left by Cyclone Pailin. But there's still a big concern weighing on their minds. We're going to bring you that story. It's up next.
Africa Business Profiles, in association with Energy Group.
By nature, Africans, like other people elsewhere, are very aspirational. They want to improve their livelihoods. They want to become business people. They want to make more money. They want to have choice. So they do not want to be told, you will use this seed, you will use this technology. They want to be given choice. We have a tendency globally just to come and instruct people and tell them what to do and show them how to do it. But we've learned that our approach of inclusive innovation, our approach of saying no one entity can solve the challenges that we face, but collaboration with NGOs, with communities, with academia, with other companies. Through this collaboration, we are able to really make science more relevant and solve local problems.
CNN original series Anthony Bourdain Parts Unknown, Sicily.
An octopus. Cuttlefish. Pancetta Leonata. Oh, that looks good. This juice. How do you say it in Italian? Swordfish. Looks like hell. Tastes like heaven. Smells good in here. Chin. Caponata. That's old school. That's Sicily right there.
Anthony Bourdain Parts Unknown, Sicily, only on CNN.
My mission is to get the viewers to understand the world around them. People are starved for news about the world and context about the world. The show is able to appeal to people at every level.
Fareed Zakaria GPS, Sunday on CNN. The Taliban tried to kill her for going to school. They only made her stronger. Her name is Malala, and she talks to CNN's Christiane Amanpour.
You still have huge dreams. They didn't take that away from you.
Hear her story, her vision for the future, and why she'll never stop.
They only can shoot a body, but they cannot shoot my dreams.
The Bravest Girl in the World with Christiane Amanpour. Tonight only on CNN.
We're going to get a check of the weather right now. A perfect storm of fire and heat has scorched 50,000 hectares of land near Sydney, and nearly 100 fires are still burning. Meteorologist Pedram Javaheri is live at the International Weather Center with more. Pedram.
Hi, Pauline. Yeah, you know, this is a very, very early start to the fire season. Typically, we begin to see it kick in here in October, but the peak of it typically comes around, say, January and February. And you look at some of the images, just incredible images coming out of Sydney, a city of 4.5 million residents. And these are the ominous skies the folks out there are dealing with, as the particulates, the pollutants, the ash, all of it filling the atmosphere, because about an hour's drive to your west, we have considerable fires on the order of 91 fires, 7 of which are major flames across this region. And we're coming off of the winter season, you've got to keep in mind, in the southern hemisphere. The spring season began on the 1st of September. It was the record warmest winter across this region for areas around, say, Victoria, Canberra, Sydney, all of them experiencing record heat in the winter months. And the city of Springwood is also about an hour west of Sydney. Had only seen 34 millimeters of rainfall. They should see on the order of 100 millimeters. So all of this put together, setting up for what could be one of the worst fire seasons in about a decade or so across areas of Sydney. And you can see the thermal signature of all the fires right now out across New South Wales. There's the main concentration. Again, a large-scale event there just west of Sydney, and we have those westerly winds pushing all that smoke towards the population center. And what's made this event so destructive, and the firefighters talking about this being an extraordinary fire event, is the wind direction being very erratic. At one point coming in from the northwest, then switching, coming in from the northeast, then coming in from the north, and all of this changing every single hour, making it very difficult for the firefighters to try to keep a track of. And you see the temperature department, Pauline, it's not helping. 23, one above the average. Look what happens on Sunday. On Monday, we get to 33 degrees Celsius. That is about 93 degrees Fahrenheit. And with these sort of temperatures in the spring season, it is very, very scary situation for our friends across Australia, thinking about what the summer months may hold as we head on into, say, December and January. So certainly a story that is going to have a lot of people watching closely here across Australia.
And it's happening early, and it's not just the heat, but as you showed us, the complication of the wind direction. All right, Pedram, thanks for the explanation there. Pedram Javahari there at the Weather Center. Manisha.
The powerful cyclone that hit India's east coast last weekend came and went quickly, but the damage is more lasting. As Sunima Udas reports, residents of a fishing village fear for their livelihood.
Pulling together. Even in the most desperate of times, a reason to celebrate. Fishing hamlets like this bore the brunt of Cyclone Pylene's fury. All 200 boats here damaged. Fisherman D. Arya shows us what's left of his boat. The sea is our God, he says. If we go out to fish, we'll have food. Otherwise, we die. We are the product of this sea. No functioning boats, fishing nets also rendered useless. Most here remember the 1999 cyclone, which hit the same area, killing 10,000 people. This time, though, countless survived, thanks to early warnings. He says the government workers came to our village with hailers and said, let's go, and took all of us to a shelter. Happy to be alive, but frustrated with how little is left. When Nama returned from the safe house, she found what used to be her roof strewn across the beach. It's all gone, she says. The water came till here and pushed everything through the roof. Possessions worth her entire life savings now washed away. Nama's son Narayan says what we're seeing around us is actually an improvement after 4 days of cleanup. When we came back after the cyclone, this whole beach was like a ghost town, he says. Most of the boats had sunk 5 to 6 meters under the sand. We had to dig all of them out. When the cyclone hit, locals here say the strong wind from the coast carried some boats half a kilometer inland and into this village. They've completely cleared out this area now, but they say much of their belongings have been destroyed. In this village of 5,000 people, 80% of the homes damaged. Locals were quick to return from the shelters, but the bright colors of their homes do not reflect the mood here. They wait stoically for promised food aid. On the 4th day, some relief. The government is distributing 50 kilograms of rice per family. But what good is rice without fish, they ask, their only source of income? It's a pitiful condition. I cannot survive on small bits of food, she says. We have lost everything. We are crying inside. Their resilience, commendable. But the pain still palpable. Sunima Udas, CNN, Noyanugam Village, Odisha, India.
Still to come right here on World Business Today, you may remember this as 007's famous submarine car. Now its mystery buyer has come forward with plans to turn this pricey piece of movie memorabilia into his next big project.
Smart companies choose Germany. In Germany's capital region, we are building Berlin TXL, the Urban Tech Republic. We've got the space, the people, and the facilities to build a world-class network for science and industry, the ideal environment for creating solutions for the city of the future. Our location in Europe's fastest-growing tech hub will help us make Berlin TXL a major destination for urban technologies.
Germany, smart up your business.
These are the wrecks of just some of the vessels that have brought thousands of immigrants here to Lampedusa.
This is taking you to the heart of the story.
You can see Some of the refugees have left items of clothing, a pair of jeans here. You get a sense that if you imagine hundreds of people crammed onto this ship, just how desperate those making that dangerous journey from North Africa to here must be.
This is CNN.
Aiming for gold. Join a global journey that ends at the Sochi Games. This month, get into the mindset of Olympic hockey players.
It's a different type of feeling that you can speak your native language all the time.
And
It was tough today.
it's extremely hard. Training for skiing in the summer. Aiming for gold. Saturday on CNN in association with Russian Railways.
Every country has an identity, a history, customs, culture. A unique landscape that determines how its people live, work, and play. Now get an insider's look with CNN's On the Road. Next week, explore Myanmar.
See how this once reclusive country is opening its doors, its sacred sites, finally revealing its treasures.
On the Road, Myanmar, all next week on CNN.
I'm Becky Anderson in London, and this is CNN.
Live from CNN Hong Kong, I'm Pauline Chu.
And I'm Manisha Tank at CNN London. A very warm welcome back to World Business Today. So let's get an update without further ado on the European stock market numbers. I was saying earlier in the show that this time yesterday they were moving lower, but we've been moving higher. The Xetra DAX, though, pulling down just a fraction, pretty much flat right now. Otherwise, the major indexes moving higher. Those Europe-wide indexes up for the 7th straight session, which is interesting, really, given the type of week we've had, the type of 2 weeks we've had. We finally had a resolution to that US debt ceiling crisis, but also we're getting numbers out of China on accelerating growth, and that's really given these markets a push. I'm sure that's certainly the case in Asia, Pauline.
It is indeed, Manisha. China's GDP in the third quarter rose 7.8%. So the markets mostly moved higher here in the Asia-Pacific region on that data. Investors also very much relieved about that resolution in Washington. Now, as a result of the Chinese data, copper prices gained, pushing shares higher in Shanghai and in Sydney. And the main Aussie benchmark there was up 0.7% off the back of that China data, with China, of course, being a very important trading partner, especially in the resources sector for Australia. Well, let's see where futures are pointing right now in the U.S., with Wall Street set to open in about 5 hours from now. We are in earnings season, and investors will get the latest results from companies including General Electric and Morgan Stanley on this Friday. And as you can see, futures all pointing up in a positive direction, Manisha.
Now, people in Italy are facing disruption on public transport today. Unions are calling their members out on a 24-hour strike. It is a protest over austerity measures set out in the government's 2014 budget, which still needs to be approved by Parliament. On Thursday, the Prime Minister Enrico Letta got together with someone who understands how tough it is to get lawmakers to agree on a budget. He was in Washington, comparing notes with Barack Obama.
It's clear that Italy is moving in the right direction in stabilizing its finances and embarking on reforms that will make it more competitive. And we spent a lot of our time discussing the importance of European growth.
I congratulated President Obama for yesterday's success. It's his success, but it's also our success, because yesterday's decision was very important for the stability in the markets in the world, in Europe and in Italy, first of all.
Deal goes, the most immediate effects of it were felt in Washington. The end of the shutdown, meaning hundreds of thousands of furloughed workers could finally go back to the office. Landmarks, national parks are once again accepting visitors. However, the last-minute save did nothing to resolve the contentious issues that continue to divide Democrats and Republicans. On Thursday, the U.S. president warned conservatives to drop their anti-government ideology and change how business in Washington gets done.
Some of the same folks who pushed for the shutdown and threatened default claimed their actions were needed to get America back on the right track, to make sure we're strong. But probably nothing has done more damage to America's credibility in the world, our standing with other countries, than the spectacle that we've seen these past several weeks. It's encouraged our enemies, it's emboldened our competitors, and it's depressed our friends who look to us for steady leadership.
That is true. Many of the experts we've spoken with have raised the issue of credibility. Well, while the U.S. was able to avoid a debt default, some other countries haven't been so lucky, and their reputations have taken a hit. Jim Bolden explains.
In a perfect world, governments would pay all their bills using taxes and investments. Few can. To fill the gap, they sell bonds with a promise to pay back the value of the bond with interest. There are plenty of examples when countries would not or could not fulfill those promises. And that usually means default.
In economic terms, it means it saves the money it would have been paying in debt repayments, but it loses credibility, literally, with the international capital markets.
In the most recent examples, Argentina defaulted in late 2001. Inflation soared. In 1998, Russia defaulted on treasury bonds and suspended payments on international debt. North Korea stopped paying back some loans in 1987. Even Great Britain had to take a $4 billion IMF loan in 1976. In part, that staved off fear of a default. That is reminiscent of the recent Eurozone economic crisis. Technically, there was no outright default. No country refused to pay back debts. But in order to meet obligations, and of course in return for painful budget cuts, Ireland, then Portugal, and then Spain got bailout loans from the IMF, EU, and the European Central Bank. Greece, of course, is another matter. After its painful descent into economic and political crisis and two bailouts, Greece's bondholders were encouraged to take haircuts or partial losses on the bonds they hold. A default by some definitions. Years on, and few can see the Greek economy rebounding soon.
Greece is really tragic. It's a really tragic example of us not having within the international financial system a proper sovereign insolvency framework.
Ironically, after extreme and sharp pain for their citizens, the economies of Russia and Argentina started to grow again within 2 years.
Sometimes a default can enable a country to recover and therefore repay its debts.
Repay, perhaps, but not repair reputations. Defaulting countries are treated with some suspicion on international markets for years afterwards. Jim Bolden, CNN, London.
So if all of that has put you off any investment in government bonds of any kind, you might like a very alternative investment. Perhaps you'd like to own a piece of US presidential history. Your chance might be coming up. Memorabilia from President John F. Kennedy is on display now in New York ahead of an auction next month. The sale is timed to mark the 50th anniversary of JFK's assassination in Dallas. It will include mementos with a unique Cold War provenance.
It was commissioned by President Kennedy to Tiffany & Company, who made these silver calendars in the beautiful box, and he gave them to his trusted, most important advisors who helped him on the Cuban Missile Crisis. It's an immensely historic item, and very few of them were of course, made.
The items were collected by Dr. Dean William Rudoy, who was just 11 years old when he volunteered for JFK's campaign. They reflect not only some of the most defining moments of JFK's presidency, but also his everyday life and personal challenges.
He put in very long hours at the office, as of course all presidents do, and he suffered from excruciating back pain throughout his life, really. And there was a back brace that he wore, and if you look at the chair closely, in the middle of the chair, about where his back brace would be, the cushion is faded and indented where his back brace leaned up against it. He spent an awful lot of time in that chair, and that chair spent an awful lot of time in the Oval Office.
And the auctioneer says the November 23rd sale should fetch at least $500,000. Pauline.
Well, billionaire Elon Musk is planning to turn movie magic into reality. You may remember this scene from the James Bond film, The Spy Who Loved Me. Now, it has been confirmed that Elon Musk was the mystery buyer behind that particular Bond car turned submarine when it went on auction in September, and it cost him a pretty penny, nearly $1 million. Now, in a statement, Musk says he was disappointed it didn't really work and that he really is going to try to make it transform for real into a submarine. Now, Musk, of course, is quite the innovator. He currently heads the electric car maker Tesla and also the private space flight firm SpaceX. And Manisha, as you know, he's also behind that concept of the Hyperloop, which is a futuristic concept, but the idea is to move from San Francisco to New York in just 30 minutes. So I would think if Elon Musk has those grand ideas and he's been able to make a lot of things happen that and a lot of naysayers out there say that he can't do it, I would think he would be the one who would be able to turn this into a submarine.
Yeah, maybe if anyone could, he could. Pauline, I already have visions of you traveling between some of those Hong Kong islands. You just drive to the edge. Come on into work through the water and want a car like that. That would be amazing. But yeah, I agree with you. It takes, you never laugh at an innovator. Sometimes the ideas can seem very far out, but you never know what a good bit of investment and some great ideas can do. Let's talk about great ideas. I think lots of people wanted some better ideas on Capitol Hill, not just kicking cans down the road. But that could be one of the reasons why perhaps these gains on European stock markets right now are somewhat cautious, even though we've had some growth numbers out of China to get excited about. It's also earnings season, so there's a lot to chew over. I think there will be a lot of fat chewed as the day goes on. So we'll keep watching these markets for you. But there are the numbers right now. The FTSE up about 1/3. We've got the Xetra DAX up just a fraction. It did move into negative territory a little bit earlier. The Zurich SMI was one of those stocks that managed to stay high most of the session a day ago when everyone was trying to digest this deal on Capitol Hill. We are about 2 hours into the trading day. How's it looking over there, Pauline?
Well, Manisha, we're mostly in positive territory except for the Nikkei, and that's for two reasons. Relief that there was finally a deal there on Capitol Hill, and also a pretty strong GDP data out of China for the third quarter. It shows that growth in China increased by 7.8%. So we see some gains there on the Hang Seng and the Shanghai Composite. Also, the main Aussie benchmark and resource stocks gained at 0.75% there. And that is it for this edition of World Business Today. Manisha and I will be back with Maggie Lake in 4 hours' time with the opening bell on Wall Street. Marketplace Middle East is coming up next.
Excellence in flight, Korean Air.
Living Golf Minute in time with Rolex.
It was more Harry Potter than Tiger Woods, but celebrating 1 year to the Ryder Cup, the destination was Glen Eagles, not Hogwarts.
Every time the Ryder Cup was played, I was glued to the tube and had been disappointed way too many times. Being at the opening ceremonies when Dow Finsterwald gave that, he gave impassioned speech as the captain of the U.S. team. In 1993, I actually asked the PGA if I could be a captain, and overseas, I'd like to be the captain overseas, and they acceded to that. Here, I didn't ask anybody, and the call came from Ted Bishop, the incoming president of the PGA, and I welcomed the call. I was hoping I was going to get the call, and I didn't lobby for it at all. It happened, and I'm certainly glad it did.
CNN original series Anthony Bourdain Parts Unknown, Sicily.
Our octopus. Cuttlefish. Pancetta. Leonata. Oh, that looks good. This juice. How do you say it in Italian? Swordfish. Looks like hell. Tastes like heaven. Smells good in here.
Chin. Caponata. That's old school. That's Sicily right there.
Anthony Bourdain Parts Unknown, Sicily, only on CNN. International Desk, tonight on CNN.
A social media revolution at a time of economic stagnation. The founder of YouTube talks about the Arab Spring and what the Middle East could learn from Silicon Valley.
We created the solution that other people were able to leverage. We created the stage, the platform for people to share their talents and experiences and ideas with the world.
And stalled economies, what's being done to get investment flowing again, especially from the West. If economic dissatisfaction was the spark for the Arab Spring, then social media was the lightning rod. On platforms such as Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, voices of dissent could quickly pull together mass protests. And while arguably living standards have not improved in the last 3 years in places like Egypt, Tunisia, and Libya, social media has gone from strength to strength.
YouTube, you're really expected to do everything.
Chad Hurley is the co-founder of YouTube, which, as we know, played a prominent role in the Arab Spring. The company was founded in 2005 and just a year later was sold to Google for $1.6 billion. Hurley started his career in Silicon Valley at PayPal, the online payment system, which was sold to eBay. YouTube had a very simple concept: how to share video online within your community and beyond.
It needs to be very simple. It needs to be bare bones. It needs to be something that everyone can understand. So with YouTube, we simply made it an upload field. Any video file, upload it to our site. We'd do all the work for you and give you something you could share with others. Many services that just have very simple solutions, but once people start using them in a bigger way, they can have a bigger impact on the world.
We're sitting in the Middle East. It was considered the game changer or the trigger assistant tool within the Arab Spring. You ended up unseating leaders who almost had been in power as long as you've been on Earth.
Well, I don't think it was me. Again, we created the solution that other people were able to leverage. We created the stage, the platform for people to share their talents and experiences and ideas with the world. And YouTube was just one small part of that. If you're looking at the broader social media scene between Twitter and Facebook and others, it allowed people to communicate, it allowed people to share and view what was happening on a ground level, and hopefully have better visibility into broader implications of what was happening within their country.
In fact, you had Silicon Valley having all these new ideas, the platforms that you were talking about, having such a profound impact on a region like the Middle East. Did you ever think that would happen when you came up with the idea in a garage?
No, you cannot plan for that. All you can do is hope to create a solution that you use yourself and others find useful as well. But yeah, we were just lucky really to be in the right place at the right time, have a lot of these right kind of approaches or solutions to these particular problems within video that we were reviewing, and associating it with a brand that resonated with people that they were willing to share and kind of remember.
This idea of startups in the Middle East is crucial because of the youth unemployment here, but only 8% of the startups in Silicon Valley actually survive. So you have to have this element of failure is okay.
Yes.
Well, what's the message you give to those when you're visiting into the region then as they try to embark on their own ventures?
Try not to think about failure. I mean, with any venture, you don't want to head into it thinking like, what's going to happen when we fail? But really go into it thinking about, this is something that I care about, this is something that I believe in, and hopefully will have a broader impact. There's a difference between like, I think this is going to be a great business versus I'm inspired by the thought of what this could do. So I'd focus on that latter, and hopefully people at least enjoy the journey. Even if it ends up in failure, you're fulfilling yourself.
Chad Hurley sharing his thoughts, the co-founder of YouTube here in Abu Dhabi. Well, Arabs are asking the question, after so much political change, why have they not seen the economic benefits? When Marketplace Middle East continues, the president of the Islamic Development Bank on the roadblocks and potholes on the road to economic recovery.
America's Chris DeMarco. Paul Casey lifts the Falcon Trophy. Martin Kamer goes wire to wire. Amazing! Kamer's done it again. Sensational scenes. Kaiser Kamer scores a hat. Bunkers, dancing, aces, and Rock slays the Giants. Extraordinary. Stars fall, new stars are born.
This week on Inside Africa.
Do you ever consider when you're on the road that the tyres on which you're riding could have originated right here in Africa? I'm Errol Barnett, Inside Africa, and this week's show is all about rubber and the process of transformation, taking it from a seed in the ground to a wheel on the road.
Inside Africa, Saturday only on CNN. In association with Zenith Bank.
Aiming for gold. Join a global journey that ends at the Sochi Games. This month, get into the mindset of Olympic hockey players.
It's a different type of feeling that you can speak your native language all the time.
And
It was tough today.
it's extremely hard. Training for skiing in the summer. Aiming for gold. Saturday on CNN in association with Russian Railways.
If the people of the region have any hopes of seeing stability in the broader Middle East, then investment has to start flowing back into the so-called transition economies. Basically, we've seen private sector investment dry up with all the uncertainty, especially in Syria. The Gulf states have reiterated their support for these economies, especially in Egypt. But the head of the Islamic Development Bank suggests the West could be doing more.
We have the greatest number of unemployed youth. So we have to attract investors from all over the world. This is our duty as investment institutions, and also I think the duties of the G8 countries.
But it's not just a lack of foreign investment stifling economies in the region. Security issues hinder economic growth, especially in places like the West Bank. According to a recent World Bank report, the Palestinian economy could grow by up to a third if Israeli restrictions were lifted. Jim Clancy takes a closer look.
The opportunities seem endless. Tourism, minerals at the Dead Sea, date production and other agriculture in the Jordan Valley. The World Bank says the Palestinian economy could grow by $3.5 billion a year, or 35% GDP. But the tantalizing prediction hinges on whether Israel will ease security restrictions in what is known as Area C, comprising more than 60% of the West Bank. Without that,
this economy cannot be sustained, cannot be developed. We cannot create the growth needed in this economy. We cannot create the jobs needed in this economy with donor assistance alone.
According to a World Bank report, potash and bromine mining at the Dead Sea could be worth $900 million a year to the Palestinian economy. A popular tourist spot, the Dead Sea could generate more than $125 million a year for the Palestinians if, the report said, they were able to develop tourism as the Israelis have done themselves. Increased water and agriculture could deliver some $700 million. Construction, more than $225 million. And the list goes on. A government spokesman told CNN Israel is well aware of the need to nurture the Palestinian economy. But any rollback in those security restrictions in Area C hinges on the direct, ongoing talks with the Palestinians. In other words, it would appear that without a deal, all of that economic promise evaporates. The Palestinians' chief negotiator in those talks showed frustration while leading diplomats and journalists on a tour of the area. Because while Israeli settler enterprises are generating hundreds of millions of dollars a year, most Palestinians can only stand by and watch.
And I want to show you that in the 108 kilometers between us and Jordan, this is the best colonial enterprise there is.
One settler enterprise markets dates to Europe, Russia, Canada, and the U.S. Another Israeli company is manufacturing and marketing beauty products derived from the Dead Sea on a global scale. Some of the settlers sent here by the Israeli government more than 40 years ago don't deny they are profiting, but they say they're also helping Palestinians.
6,000 Palestinians, they earn about 2,500 shekel per month because they're not working all the months.
That's about $700 a month, and many Palestinians would argue the settlers are the ones making the real money. No one denies the Palestinian economy is in trouble. Foreign donors are weary, the deficit's growing.
Our economy now is dependent on donors, dependent on public sector, and little private sector investment is happening. Why? Because of the constraints by the Israeli occupation. They got to change.
The Jordan Valley and Dead Sea, currently under Israeli control, hold the key to liberating the Palestinian economy and the future of any Palestinian state. Jim Clancy, CNN, the West Bank.
While there's a reluctance to put money into that part of the world from the private sector, a lot of money is coming out of the Arab Spring economies into safer havens. And this is perhaps one reason why we see the Dubai property market heating up. Leonie Lakhani has that story.
There's plenty of cash being pumped into Dubai's property market, and you can see evidence of that here at the city's annual real estate fair. There are deals being made, plans announced for mega projects like this one for the Dubai Eye, which is part of a $1.5 billion development coming up in the next 3 years. People here are also lapping up new residential properties. The property consultant Jones Lang LaSalle says the number of sales was up 30% in the first half of this year compared to last year. What's more, 80% are cash buyers, and they're coming here from Asia, Europe, and the Middle East.
Dubai has been a beneficiary of the Arab Spring. We've seen nationals from countries such as Libya, from Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, buying properties in Dubai. It's a stable, safe haven in their view, and a good place to tuck away some capital for a while.
And that's helping to push prices up. Residential prices are up 20% this year, according to JLL, but they're still 30% off their 2008 peak. The property crash of 2009, where prices fell as much as 50% in some places, is still fresh in people's minds. Now, will this new price rise lead to another real estate bubble? Opinions here are divided, but there is still some cautious optimism that Dubai has learned from past mistakes.
We have witnessed the exponential growth of Dubai. We've also witnessed the downside of the real estate market. The reason why I don't believe that there will be a hike in prices or there will be a bust is because of the rules and regulations that are implemented by the Dubai Land Department today.
That includes tighter lending from banks and a real estate regulator to oversee transactions. The question is whether all the checks and balances will keep the market from overheating again. It's taken more than 4 years to get the property market back on its feet. The feeling here is no one can afford another crash.
Leonie Lakhani on the red-hot property market in neighboring Dubai. And that's all for this edition of CNN Marketplace Middle East. From Abu Dhabi, I'm John Defterios. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.
In the business of bringing joy, Kirloskar goes much beyond enriching lives.
Every country has an identity, a history, customs, culture. A unique landscape that determines how its people live, work, and play. Now, get an insider's look with CNN's On the Road. Next week, explore Myanmar.
See how this once reclusive country is opening its doors, its sacred sites, finally revealing its treasures.
On the Road, Myanmar, all next week on CNN.
My voice, my story,
my life. In South Africa.
In Kenya.
South Sudan.
Hear Africa's voices.
A way of understanding the world. A door to the soul.
In Africa.
In Africa.
In Africa.
CNN African Voices.
My name is Ziad Mahirsi. I'm a